So, hallo, guten Morgen. Ein hoffentlich normales Semester. Wir kommen dazu. Sie sind in der Vorlesung Schaltungstechnik oder Circuit Technology. Ich freue mich, dass wir ganz entspannt hier ein Semester anfangen können. Das finde ich total klasse. Ich hoffe, Sie haben auch Gelegenheit, in diesem Semester wieder jede Menge Unfug zu machen und viel Spaß zu haben. Ich habe mit Freude wahrgenommen, dass wir wieder Wagen hier übers Intec gezogen sind, die Promotionen gefeiert haben, sehr ausgelassen. Das möchte ich Ihnen ausdrücklich raten. Tun Sie das bitte, damit Sie gut gelaunt auch hier in die Vorlesung kommen. Ich darf mich kurz vorstellen. Mein Name ist Rüdiger Quay. Ich bin hier Professor am INATEC für energieeffiziente Hochfrequenzelektronik und dann im Nebenjob ist das bei Fraunhofer. Da leite ich im Moment das Fraunhofer IAF. Das heißt, wir machen auch das, wovon wir hier reden. Da lege ich äußerst Wert drauf. Also für uns ist das nicht nur Theorie, sondern wir beschäftigen uns mit Schaltungen aller Art und tun das auch in Freiburg. Also Schaltungen werden auch hier in Freiburg tatsächlich produziert, was die meisten von Ihnen wahrscheinlich gar nicht wissen. Ich würde Ihnen ein paar einleitende Worte heute geben zu dem, wie es technisch funktionieren wird. Eine Sache, was ich immer mache, ist, dass wir diese Vorlesung im Wesentlichen auf Englisch machen, und zwar als Angebot. Ich will Ihnen das direkt am Anfang ein bisschen nahebringen. Die Idee ist, das Englische holt Sie schneller ein, als Sie das vermuten würden. Ich weiß, Sie haben einen deutschen Studiengang. Und wenn Sie aber zuhören und das lernen, ist das jetzt besser, als wenn Sie das später lernen müssen, wenn Sie das irgendwie ad hoc können müssen. Da ist ein Studium eigentlich ziemlich gut geeignet zu. Sie können alles fragen auf Deutsch, wir können auch alles auf Deutsch diskutieren, das ist überhaupt kein Problem. Ich würde das nur einfach so anbieten, dass Sie eine Chance haben, sich daran zu gewöhnen, also ich will Ihnen das nur aus meinem Arbeitsalltag erzählen. Also mein Arbeitsalltag ist zu 50% Englisch. Und das ist vielleicht auch eine Hilfe für Sie, um auch da reinzukommen und um sich auch international dann bewegen zu können. Und das ist so ähnlich, wie man die Wahl hat, wie man Filme auf Netflix in verschiedenen Sprachen guckt. So ähnlich stelle ich mir das hier vor, dass Sie einfach hier den Sprachenswitch jetzt auf Englisch setzen, und wenn Sie nicht klarkommen, dann können Sie es auch sagen, aber ich glaube, es ist für Sie letztendlich eine große Hilfe. Es ist besser, das jetzt zu tun, als wenn Sie das später tun, in einem Kontext, wo Sie es dann ad hoc müssen. Das ist so meine Idee. Ich fange mal ein bisschen an. Wie Sie sehen, die Vorlesung wird aufgezeichnet, das heißt, Sie haben eine gute Chance, das auch nachzuvollziehen. Alles das, was ich hier gesagt habe, werden Sie auch anschauen können. So Sie es denn dann anschauen. Also ich glaube, das ist auch das ist wichtig. Wir haben, wenn ich es richtig gezählt habe, 12 Vorlesungen. Wir haben am 31. haben wir die Pfingstpause. Und wir haben am Ende der Vorlesung auch noch die Gelegenheit, eine Vorlesung zu machen, wo Sie auch Fragen stellen können. Sie können jederzeit fragen, und da bitte ich Sie auch drum. Also mir macht es am meisten Spaß, wenn Sie direkt interagieren. Dieses Thema hier ist sehr spannend, weil man sehr viel auch direkt lernen kann in dem, wie man es tut. Und es gibt keine Übung dazu, aber trotzdem werden wir hier das ein oder andere einfach mal durchsprechen, damit Sie auch was nachvollziehen. Ich glaube, das ist sehr wichtig. Das ist jetzt eine formale Ankündigung, die muss ich immer machen. Wir haben 3 ECTS und es gibt am Ende eine Klausur, die nicht besonders zeitlimitiert ist. Also es ist relativ lang, 90 Minuten, aber nicht um Sie zu quälen, sondern um das auch ordentlich machen zu können. Das ist nicht diese Idee, dass man in kurzer Zeit irgendwas reproduzieren muss, sondern dass wir ein bisschen Zeit haben auch. Und das Datum werden wir dann entsprechend ankündigen. Ich richte mich in der Regel immer danach, was Sie als Pflichtveranstaltungen haben, dass das auch in dem Kontext für Sie vernünftig funktioniert. Das ist mir wichtig. Genau, jetzt ist der Punkt, was Sie noch machen müssen, ist sich bei INGIAS einsetzen, und das ist sozusagen die erste Lernkurve. Das Passwort, was Sie brauchen, ist MMIC, steht für es ist eine Mikrowellenschaltung, die wird MIMIC abgekürzt, MMIC, und dann das Jahr. Und da kommen Sie da ganz entspannt rein und finden auch die Materialien und die Videos. Da brauche ich, glaube ich, nicht viel zu sagen. kommuniziere auch da öfter drüber, wenn irgendwelche Sachen sich ändern oder so, wenn hier eine Veränderung eintritt. Also ruhig mal reinschauen. Das mache ich dann tatsächlich über Ilias auch. Und wie Sie auch sehen, deshalb stehe ich hier hinten. Ich würde am liebsten gerne bei ihm stehen, aber wenn ich das jetzt nicht mache, dann hört man auf dem Video nichts. Dann sagen Sie nachher, die Audioqualität ist nicht richtig. Also ich stehe eigentlich am liebsten unter Ihnen. Da macht es eigentlich auch am meisten Spaß. Gut, es gibt ein Skript, da ist jetzt was drin. Wir machen dieses Jahr ein klein bisschen was anderes, da sage ich gleich was. Es gibt ein Feedback von Ihnen, gerade für diese Grundvorlesung, dass wir die Nachhaltigkeit in ihren verschiedenen Dimensionen hier auch einpflegen sollen. Und was wichtig ist, deshalb haben wir jetzt ein Skript, was Sie erstmal vorfinden, woran Sie sich erstmal orientieren können. Wir werden das aber in diesem Semester ein bisschen anders machen, wo wir auch immer wieder Sachen einstreuen, damit Sie die aktuellen Themen auch immer verbinden können mit dem Thema Nachhaltigkeit. Das ist uns wichtig. Also wir haben ja hier ein relativ technisches Thema, was Ihnen aber, glaube ich, noch nicht so ganz geläufig ist. Sie werden ja Ingenieurinnen und Ingenieure für nachhaltige technische Systeme. Und dieses Schaltungsthema ist deshalb für Sie spannend, weil Sie da tatsächlich Systeme bauen, was ja sonst nicht so typisch ist. Also Sie lernen ja alles Mögliche, auch total wichtig. Aber das eigentliche Systemdesign, wie macht man das denn konkret? Das geht teilweise, meines Erachtens, ist nicht immer klar, wie das technisch konkret passiert. Also wie macht man das denn eigentlich? Und da ist halt auch wichtig, dass sie eine Chance haben, das Ganze dann auch nachzuvollziehen. Und das können wir halt hier besonders gut tun. Da gibt es dann zum Beispiel auch Möglichkeiten, rumzuspielen. Also es gibt zum Beispiel freie Simulatoren. Das ist auch so eine Anregung für Sie. Das werde ich jetzt nicht nachprüfen, aber was immer spannend ist, ist mal zu schauen, was gibt es denn so an Software, um irgendwelche Dinge auch wirklich mal anschauen zu können, konkret. Ich werde auch die einen oder anderen Tipp geben, wie man wirklich mal auch eine Übung machen kann für sich selber. Und da gibt es zum Beispiel hier im Open Source Bereich gibt es schöne Sachen. Das QX zum Beispiel ist ein schönes Programm, was auf allen Systemen läuft, wo man relativ viele Beispiele auch kriegt, ohne dass man große Lizenzen kriegen muss. Und da finden Sie auch viele Themen, wo man einfach mal selber rumspielen kann mit Dingen, die Sie auch ganz konkret bewegen. Also zum Beispiel hier, da ist der Buck-Konverter zum Beispiel als Beispiel genannt. Das ist also eine Schaltung. Da können Sie sagen, naja, warum interessiert mich die? Naja, da sage ich halt, wenn Sie Solarenergie sagen, ist das halt die prinzipielle Schaltung, die man braucht, um Sonnenenergie ins Netz zu speisen. Das ist so einfach ist es, und dass die gut sein muss, das ist ja dann in dem Moment, wo ich es gesagt habe, auch klar. Also das ist gut. Let's start with sustainability. I'll switch a bit, and I hope you get some ideas in this. So when we talk about sustainability, which is your request, we have a couple of terms which you dump into, and in many ways, so sustainability, this topic, the definition, has multiple dimensions. And one thing which is technically always very obvious is the term efficiency. So it's clear that if you convert power into power, then you want to do this with a minimum amount of losses. So that is a very simple definition of efficiency. So you say you have a very clear target, and you want to achieve something, and for example converting energy into energy, and then you calculate a factor which tells you how good you are in doing so. However, this by far is not the only dimension of sustainability, and especially the other terms where I took out two, sufficiency and consistency, they are of course very much related. And for example, when we look at all the electronics we carry around, they might be quite efficient. And for example, in this thing, how would you realize that this converter is not efficient? What is your initial finding for this? What would you say? You can answer in German if you don't want to do it in English. So don't feel inhibited by me speaking English. How do you feel that this thing is not efficient?
It's warm.
Yeah. So that is the first thing. Things get warm, and for example, I just want to invite you, just touch your electronic device. It is getting heated. Now the term efficiency in this case, for example, for digital devices is quite critical, because what are we doing in digital systems? For example, if you have these, if you have the computer in front of you, is this really a power converter? What is the output of the computer? So what do you look at when you look at the computer? You're silent, and I would also be silent, because it's not so easy to say. Essentially, we are extracting some kind of visual information, which we also put to the screen, and that is then a topic where it's not so easy to define some way of efficiency. That's not so easy to say for a computer. What would be efficiency in this term? Yeah? And maybe there's for computers it would be a bit easier when you really run calculations for a certain type of calculation. How much energy would you need? So if you define in simple terms, what is an output you would like to do, and you know that there are some problems, which especially with the consistency here, that when you're going into a system, you have targets, but at the same time, there's a problem with the energy which you're consuming. And for example, one thing we have with the digital domain these days is we are all getting more efficient, maybe in some terms, when we convert power. So these things are getting more efficient, but at the same time, we are putting a lot more energy into the digital systems, yeah, which is a very problematic. And as we will see in this lecture, the digital consumption we have, so how many bits do we use per day, there we are on an exponential rise. Yeah, so what we are doing whenever we switch something on, we are consuming a lot of bits, and that in itself is a big problem. So what I would like to tell you, that with the circuits idea and the ways we do things, the functions especially we address, we are far beyond just this idea of efficiency. Yeah, so it's not just converting power into power, although this is a very important task, and we will certainly look at that. But there are many things which we are where we have to look into, and where we are trying to be both not only efficient in some way, but also sufficient and also consistent. Yeah, these are things, and this will not be a very regular circuit session in this case. So there's very classical circuit lectures, but I will put these arguments in now. And yes, I mean, you might have seen those. This is now United Nations 17 goals. Maybe some of you already know the numbers so well. I was at a conference, and for example, if you enter gender, and the person talking to me was only talking about number 5. She wanted to talk to me about gender, but she was only mentioning number 5, because it was clear to everyone that this is then the gender equality. But what I'm trying to say here, when I put on those targets, that with the microelectronics and the electronics, we are influencing a lot of those goals directly and indirectly. Maybe you can look at some of them, and maybe find things where you think that microelectronics is already contributing to these goals. Would you like to make some suggestions? So, for example, what does microelectronics have to do with hunger, for example? Starvation. Where do we influence this when we are speaking about electronics? Is there any idea which you might have? For example, in modern agriculture, do you have ideas how this is influenced by what we do with microelectronic devices?
If you monitor your crops and try to achieve higher yields out of it, and you have some kind of sensors or drones or something, and later on get more food out of it.
Yeah, very good. So this is a very good answer already. So there's obviously if you look at a modern truck which is used in agriculture, this is more a very complex sensor system which also does some functions in turning soil over or whatever. But there's many sensors being applied these days, especially also to work on the deficiencies of what we do. So for example, if we put out all the nutrients or whatever into the soil, we're normally oversampling, we're putting too much, we're putting too little, and modern sensors are actually influencing this quite a lot. And maybe also for number 13, climate change. What does microelectronics have to do with climate change? Do you see some direct relation there? Is it good or bad if we're using a lot of electronics with respect to the climate change? It's not an easy answer, but maybe you have some arguments already today. So what in this might be good or bad for climate change when we're using those devices?
It's good to measure data for climate change, but it's not so good to produce a lot of circuits, so it has both sides.
Yeah, it definitely has both sides, and that's also a special topic which, for example, I'm going into, and there's certainly a lot of consumption on what we do with electronics, so we need a lot of carbon dioxide at the moment for making this stuff. That's one thing. Maybe also a bit, does anybody know how much of the digital world, or how much power the digital world already uses in Germany as we speak? So when we are making a check now for the power balance, how much of that goes into digital systems as we speak? Is it more like nothing? Is it more like percent range, or is it more like 50%? Any ideas? So when we are doing all these things that we are doing, turning things on, and it's more in the percent range at the moment. It's good. So and the trouble is when we're using all these cloud services that we are shooting for. I'm speaking now about electricity. We are going towards double-digit numbers. So if we are not careful with our digital consumption, we might end up in using about 10% of the power for just for digital communication and digital processing. At the moment, it's more in the range of 1% or 2%. But if we continue what we are doing at the moment, we are going into the 10% range, and that is critical because, as you know, mobility is a big, and heating are the big players, and we need to make sure that we are not, with all this digital stuff, which is good, as you said, we are not going into something which keeps us from keeping the planet, so to say. And there's more. So this is just the beginning. I will always tell you, because we are dealing with different domains of the circuit. So the circuit stuff is in the beginning is very electrical, but what you are learning is how to do these things: sensors, converters, and maybe also full systems, which in the end help you to understand the world a little bit better. And that is something which I would like to give you a first idea. What you need to understand, if I take a resistor and a couple of connectors, this is, of course, you say, this might be boring. I still find it attractive. But what you are doing when you are doing this is important. Maybe in my own world, it's always interesting to check what you have in your hands. So, for example, when you find a cell phone, what would you say? How many components are in the cell phone as we speak? So, my cell phone has how many components which we have to address electrically? How much is that? What is in there? Any ideas how much we need to, you know this without maybe having thought about it. What is the principal thing you check when you buy any of these? What is the first thing you check for? You go to a store, and then what is the first number you check?
Price.
Yeah, okay, price. No, that's good. Very good. Price is perfect. Assuming you have made your budget. I like it. It's very good. What is the first? I should have been more specific. What is the first technical number? Which I always find intriguing because this is a mobile phone. And what is the first thing you ask?
Storage.
Yeah, storage, of course. If I ask you 256 or 64, you clearly say 256 gigabyte. If you don't have to pay for it. I mean, that's of course the travel. And that gives you some idea because 256 gigabyte, let's make a simple assumption for each bit which is stored there, you need one transistor. It's not true, and we need a little bit more, but already that tells you something which you know, which is 256 times 10 to the 9 transistors. So you're saying this thing has 256 billion transistors. And then you start scratching your head, oh my God, what do I do? And what I'm trying to tell you here is that this circuit story is telling you how to build a system because you will not address individually this number of individual components, of course not. Yeah? But what you're learning is some hierarchy because the nice thing about system design is, what is this? At the end of the day, this is some kind of box. I'm speaking in on the audio or maybe on the camera, I'm visible, and the output is maybe some data stream. And in between, a billion transistors have been used. So what you're learning is that we're getting to something which is extremely important. We're getting to some kind of reduction. Because no matter whether it's Google, iPhone, whatever you take, at the end of the day, it's converting speech or video into data streams. Maybe in the meantime, amongst others, that's what you do. Yeah? And what you're learning at this point is that with this circuit design, we're learning two things. We can reduce the problem and we can go hierarchical because at some point it's clear that a smart woman or a smart man has looked into this and has checked into it on a hierarchical level. So at the top level, it's a box, but somewhere below, somebody must have checked what is in there and must have designed that. Yeah, so this is something which I want to point to. So we're not talking only about double E here. We are talking about you understanding how you make a system useful and also a lot of other things. For example, you just held your breath. Normally I can also smash, it's not mine, otherwise I would smash it into the corner. It's my employer's phone, so I have to be a bit more careful. But it's clear that if I do this, I'm not worried. And I can always, you can abstract this, I could also throw it from here. There's a lot of other things we need to learn here. So because you have clearly expectation in this thing. Yeah? And if you even, I mean, there's even people flushing it through the toilet in the internet and just checking how many of those will survive. Yeah? So that's a bit stupid what they do, but there's some learning because you learn something about a system. And if I tell you what all the things this thing can do, yeah, so I can throw it around, I can turn around, and I'm still expecting this thing to work. And there's many things we want to know from this system. Maybe I give you one number just to make it to interest you. What is the defining number for the power consumption of this? And it's a very strong number, just to say that. How should this work for you? When you think of the balance between battery power, which you have in there, and what you do with it. How many times would you allow these things to be charged per day from your personal experience. Would you buy a cell phone which you have to charge twice a day if it was much better than what you have in your hands right now?
Yeah, it depends on how long it takes to charge it.
Okay. Ah, you caught me. That's good. Yeah, I like it. Ah, good answer. But still, if you're running around here at the university, you have to find a wall plug. Is this something you would like to be doing? Honestly?
If it's only take maybe 50 minutes to charge, yeah, for sure. Because often we see up there in the
Okay.
library, then it would be super great.
Assuming that
But
there's
mostly it takes more time, like 30 minutes or 1 hour. Then
But we have 31 smart people in this room, and if they're all a bit lazy, smart people are sometimes a bit lazy, so then they say, I didn't do it in the morning, I do it at university, and they're all running then for the plug. So that's, but you're right, you get the message. Yeah? So there's something defining us from our habits, which is extremely important to us. So what I'm trying to imply is that these systems are not just circuits, they have to do a lot of other things. They have to be useful, they have to work all the time. They also have to work at night or whatever when you go skiing and when you go into the sun. That's all things we have to understand. And the other thing is also just to, that was already related to the power consumption, which we talked about already, is that we are consuming vast resources in producing this stuff. Yeah? So just to give you a flavor, this is TSMC, which is the company which is producing some of the most advanced semiconductors as we speak in Taiwan. And this is about the shop floor where they are making the stuff, especially the memories type of work and processors. This is football fields of machines of the highest class of cleanliness. Yeah? This is something which has strong impact on what we are doing with the circuit, and especially the power consumption that you have in the hidden energy in the system is significant. The chipset and especially this high valued stuff, yeah. And maybe I give you already a first hint. Let's take Apple, because for this I know the number. What is the technical difference between iPhone 5 and iPhone 10? In very simple terms, what has changed? For example, if you think this memory increase, how is this done? Why is this possible? Why does the iPhone 5 in the beginning cost the same amount of money than the iPhone 10 when it started?
Yeah, maybe because everything has got smaller. We are now possible to build the same storages in a way smaller place, a way smaller area, and with way smaller volume, so we can pack more storage with the same price.
And this is something which I want to tell you about. This is something we have kind of accepted. Every new device we get is better than the previous one at the same price. I know the price for this is high, so I like your sense that money is the limiting factor. That's very good because it's true. It's very useful to say that. But when you assume a certain price, maybe we make a small survey. What was the clock frequency of your first computer you ever had? I'll tell you mine last because I'm the most boring one. So maybe you start. What is the clock frequency? Or maybe you want to mention the memory you had when you had your first computer. Do you still remember? It's quite important because it has a lot to do with your experience. Does somebody want to mention some number? It's not embarrassment because at the time it was definitely state of the art. Because when we buy it, it's always very much state of the art.
Around 3.5 to 4 gigabytes.
Wow! And the memory? What was
8 gigabytes of RAM.
how much?
8.
8 gigabytes, yeah. Anybody else? Comparable numbers? Tell you mine. My first computer had 4 megahertz of clock frequency with 4 megabyte of space, and it was more expensive than what you paid for. So my one was 4,000 D-Mark, which was 2,000 euros at the time. And this is not about history. The point is we have gotten used to the idea that we, at the same price level, we get something better in the next thing. And what does that have to do with sustainability? This is actually a nightmare, because the sunk energy in this, when we are going over time, is much stronger and much more energy consuming than what we did in the past. The chipset in this one is using a lot more energy than what was done in the previous cell phone. Nobody talked to you about it because somehow people made it in a way that energy was not really a factor, but it's becoming a factor, as we all read in the news. Yeah? So what I'm trying to imply is that these ideas we are selling here on the system is just not one-dimensional. So it's not only about getting more memory. There's a lot of in this which we have to think about. And this is just I'm talking about this because we have so much experience with this. The cell phone itself is not the most important electrical system we have. There are much more important systems for what we are doing. And here you have that. So this is just to get it to you in a way. So when we combine, speak about circuits, we learn, for example, there's certain semiconductors, and we will learn a little bit about this. But what this has become in the meantime, it's a very complex 3D system, and not so many people are aware of that. But for example, already the integration scheme which we have is that we have some kind of electronics in the base, but we are building now stacked nanosystems essentially, which are keeping this up. So the world we are in today is relying critically on the enhancement of numbers of layers. And we will talk a little about that. So connectivity is already critical on this chip. And what you just said is, for example, this idea that we have a pizza. This is a very good reference because the chips we are talking about are made as pizzas, this size, 30 centimeters, and we are just putting more stuff on the pizza all the time. Every 2 years we are doubling the amount of things we put on the pizza. That's what Moore's law, who deceased 2 weeks ago, the founder of Intel, said. And it's a valid assumption which has been true for the last 50 years. So that's and what I'm implying here is there's a lot of things you know already about circuits without ever having thought about. Yeah, so this is the technical translation of it, but this is essentially what is going on in the digital world. When we are coming to memory, there are also a couple of other aspects. Is still using some of you USB sticks? Anybody? It's not so used anymore. Most people go to the cloud these days. What is the trick of this? So why do we like these? There's one function which we tend to forget, which is quite important. If I have a memory stick, put the lecture on and look in 2 years, is it still on? That's surprising, huh? It's an electrical device and it's still there. Although we didn't change any battery. Did you ever change a battery in this? Obviously not. Huh? So there are some things, there's a lot of things on there, but when you come to think about it, yes, why? I mean, yes, the computer has something, and that has to do with ideas here which are also very sustainable, because in this particular device, it's flash memory, we are changing the device itself. So we are modifying the disk in this case even the transistor, and we make a very sustainable device in the sense it doesn't need energy to conserve the information. However, if I pulled out the battery and also the wall plug from this computer, everything would be gone, at least what's on the dynamic memory. So there are some ideas here which you also learn. So concept-wise, you suddenly learn we can make memory in this way, and we can make memory in another way. And what I'm always trying to imply here, this is apparently quite nice. You can put it to your pocket, you can carry it around. What is the drawback of this? How are we paying for this nice function not having to supply power? How would you see when you put 64 gigabyte on this? What would you do then? How long would it take? In relation to other things we do in the digital world. Last time you put some stuff on a memory stick, what is the issue there?
It takes pretty long.
Yeah. Thanks for the answer. It's perfectly correct, and it's a principle. It's a very fundamental principle which you should understand for no matter what you do in your future. If you get a feature, you are always paying a price. So this is nice, of course, and in this case, normally we don't refresh the full thing. Normally we have some files which are of decent size, so it's not killing our afternoon, but it's, and this is something where I would like to invite you to think a little bit about systems. So for example, in a lot of systems, if somebody sells you something which is advantageous, this is always good that you are better in something, improving, optimizing, but there's always a drawback. And in this case, we can allow speed to be okay. Still working on this, but the nature of the idea is that we are not fast. And it's just an idea. While other things, for example, if we have some hot gamers in the room, they are critically relying on the speed of this changing the memory. So graphic cards, everything related to the processing in this is critically, you want as fast, change the memory as fast as possible, still the same amount of data. And just to give you the ideas, what does it have to do with circuits? All the information we eventually put into the storage has to go through this network. So somehow your flash memory, in this case the lines are not the limiting elements, in this case it's really the switches. While for gaming, for example, you want to make the latency or whatever you call it as fast as possible. And I just want to give you one example where you can actually see that. It's not just crazy people gaming around. There's many other things which we need. So for example, there are topics like when you, for example, have a big sensor screen and you're trying to play tennis in front of this sensor screen virtually. You will immediately realize if the system is too slow. Because if you are playing the ball and you see this thing is not directly correlated to your system, in this case it's your body moving, you will say this game is crap. And you will have an emotional response immediately if you say this will not work for me because I'm playing this and this super screen is not moving the ball fast enough for me and I cannot play my game in the way that I find it attractive. You will directly say, but what we are talking about is essentially a circuit. It's a circuit effect which we need to understand in order to get things like that going. For example, all this virtual reality at the moment partly is limited of being able to address the right amount of data in the right amount of time and communicate it. And so that's the limitation as we speak. Yeah, and at some point it comes down, and this is what you already said, comes to relatively small structures. What I always find intriguing that things which initially were developed on a super scale. So when all this was started, the numbers were big. You could see these cells today. What is represented here for such a cell is a few atoms. Yeah? And this is maybe also a message for you, because I'm old-fashioned. That's okay, but there's a point. At some point, what do we do if all this is just one atom left? Because we're getting smaller, and we need new things. Yeah, so that's something where, so this idea that memory will continue to work the way we have worked on it for the last 50 years, it's not relevant. We need to make changes there. And this is here, for example, when you take this classical concept, how memories used to be done, you're trying to connect bits on a chip, and you're seeing this is an area problem, or maybe even a 3D problem, but there are limits, yeah, so that's very clear. And at some point, we have to invent something new. And here, just as a resolution, just how did the flash work, just to give you the feeling here in this case. In this case, we are really changing the physics of single atoms in order to change the device so in the case of the flash, we are modifying, this is a semiconductor device, and by taking a certain amount of extra voltage, we are modifying the whole thing underneath physically. So we're really changing this transistor. We're not just applying a voltage, and that's the solution why you can put a device on a flash. So there's also some physics in the background. The craziest thing, the i7 at the moment, I think more or less everybody has that. It's not something which is completely out of range anymore, and maybe it's even too slow these days. What you're seeing here also is that these devices are still relatively big. Yeah? So for example, when we are taking in such a memory, in this case a processor, this is 100 square millimeters. 100 square millimeters is quite large, so it's like a stamp. Yeah? So that's already something which is huge. And what is the final limit of this at the moment? Why don't we have even more like that? So why don't we have, let's say, even more transistors or faster speed? What is finally limiting this computer or this processor?
The atom size, because you kind of get smaller every time. You know, like 5 nanometers, and they try like 3 or something, but
Yeah.
at some point you kind of go even smaller.
That's one thing, but why has it gotten so large also? There's another reason which you have already experienced.
Heat is a big issue.
Yeah. Didn't bring the picture, but you can easily check that in the internet. You can see the data centers in an IR image from space. So if you check where Google, but if you want to know where Google is, you take an infrared camera, put it on a satellite, and look at the globe, and you will see where that is. Because the amount of power we consume in these data centers, and that is what I'm trying to give to you. We all want to be sustainable, yeah? And for example, you get still emails from old-fashioned people who say, don't print this email, save the tree. That's of course correct on the first glance, but what is it replaced by? It is replaced by a Google search, which has a strong environmental impact for you asking the same thing in a digital thing, and it goes to a server in the United States. And what you are effectively, and I just want to be very frank with you, if you are using this, you're sending carbon dioxide around the globe. I'm not sure you have thought about it in this way, but checking on Google or wherever, you're assuming that Google is not 100% renewable in the energy consumption for digital, you are sending your request, and somewhere on this planet you're creating carbon dioxide which goes into the atmosphere. not necessarily into your personal budget here in Germany, but and that's why this heat story, for example, is a quite big story. And maybe a second idea, not just related only to environmentals, why is heat a problem? Fundamentally.
Yeah, also for the electronics, some electronic devices are heat dependent and work differently in higher temperatures.
Do they?
Some diodes or some resistors.
I like it, but I have another question for you. Why do we cool your computer? What is the principal answer? Why on earth do you have this stupid fan in your computer? And it's a bit more difficult than just saying it shouldn't get hot. But why are you doing this on the long run? This is a very important idea. What happens if you heat electronics?
At some point it gets destroyed.
Yeah, this is, and how is it destroyed? That's of interest. There's another thing which you know without really having thought about it. That is, the lifetime of this device goes down typically exponentially with temperature. Repeat that. The lifetime of this device goes down exponentially with temperature. That means if you're sitting there in the hot summer term, which today it's not hot, not a good example for today, but I will repeat this when we are there. When the heat room is at 30 degrees, the lifetime of this device will be much lower. There's a famous example comparing a cooled office and looking at the same video on the beach. And it's about an order of magnitude lower lifetime just using this computer here in this office environment, very nicely cooled, or going to the beach. Delta T is about 30 degrees, I think, is assumed, and it's an order of magnitude lower lifetime for the computer. If you were staying on the beach, assuming you would. It's a long-term argument. Yeah? Okay. And then maybe also something which is from the principles, and that is why I really appreciate your being here, is there are some things which we are not really aware of, but they're quite vital. Yeah? For example, how much power is your computer consuming roughly? So what we have here, what is the amount of power in watts? What would you say roughly if it's running at max power?
I think around 500.
Wow. Okay, that is already the gaming computer on the high side, but let's assume, very good, it's correct. Let's take 100 watts. On the previous fall, we had about 10 billion transistors for this processor. Why is it? What is the main reason why this thing is consuming only 100 watts? Let me say that. There's a principle here. And this is something which, for example, what happens if you just take the power away? What happens with the information? It is. So if we didn't have any hard disk or flash memory, the information is gone. So if I take everything off, the screen would be dead. And now the big moment comes is, how much power do we need to conserve the information? And there the principle is, and this is something you're critically relying on, in the CMOS, we are only consuming the main amount of energy if we change the state of the memory. So only if you make changes, ideally, you're not consuming any power when you are not changing something. So if I don't do anything on the computer, nothing is changed, Ideally, the computer would essentially consume nothing. Of course, you're aware that this is not fully true because there are, for example, leakages in transistors, and they are drawing power even in steady state. But the principle we are relying on, that only if you make a calculation, we consume this power. And so, for example, if you're gaming or if you make a strong graphical calculation of some kind, then you're consuming more power, and that is based on this principle. And this is only because we have these very nice transistors where we are just only if we, for input of this cell we are talking about, only if we make a modification, then we consume a real amount of power. Apart from the static power, as we say, which is of course quite relevant because we have gotten so small. In this case, quantum physics works against us, but there's also some very nice features. This is the next foil. That there's also a change because we are not only using the computers we used to do, the classical ones, but there are some new principles now where we are getting closer to what the brain is doing for us. And maybe I'll give you an example for that. What does it mean if if a certain amount of power is used per transistor and we are increasing the amount of data exponentially? What would happen to the energy consumption if the amount of bits we are having is going up exponentially as we are presently on? And there's a certain amount of energy spent per switching. What does it mean to the energy consumption of the system? Goes up.
Yeah, it also goes up exponentially.
Yeah. And this is a very tough problem because it would imply, if we did so, that we are running into the catastrophe I was talking about, that going into digital, we are consuming a significant amount of our power just on information. 1%, 1 to 2% as we speak, maybe. Apparently we can avoid that. So you are a generation trying to say, let's reduce our power consumption. And the real change, because we can probably not get out of this idea of having more data, the real change is to change the architecture. So it is not, repeat, not forever that power has to go up with the number of bits. So if you take these neural principles, that, for example, some of your chips which you're already getting have some of these ideas in, they can already preserve energy, for example, based on new cells, which are not only having this, so energy only consumed when there's a change in the system, which is what we presently do. You could also say we are not consuming any energy in storing something, or very little, when you change the architecture. And this is what this neuromorphic stuff, as we say, there's already neuromorphic CPUs, and there we have to learn a little bit about what they do then. So my point is getting away from the pure efficiency argument into something, why are we doing these things the way we are doing them? And that is what you can learn from such a study. And then there is even, this is something I'm presently into very much, is that if we're using single atoms, at some point, as you said, we are down to the atom level, then maybe we also use some very different physics. So for example, what we are researching at the moment very strongly in is just to link single atoms. And why? Because we can build a computer which from some special task with 1,000 bits can do the same as a supercomputer with many billion bits, or trillion bits to say it precisely. And that is what we do here with this quantum domain, which is probably when you are finishing your degree, a very regular technology. At the moment, it's a lot of research, but it's becoming visible. Yeah. So what you're changing is that you're not individual looking at bits on off, but you're connecting them. And some of the principles, some things we can also not solve today can be solved with this. So there's also some future. And you can play with that. Yesterday, maybe somebody saw it. Yesterday, at IBM, there was a big announcement of a new center created near Stuttgart. And there you could actually play with these bits a bit. And it was quite nice to. That's also so. So the circuits which we know today are not the ones we are going to use in the future. That's also learning here. Changing gears a bit, coming away from bits, coming to real power. So now we are into efficiency. What is this? If you think about this technically, you've seen this, I think. Somebody having seen a solar panel must have seen this. That tells you a lot of things where we need these systems. So what is the power we get from solar? What nature is in which power form does the solar cell, the solar energy come down? Yeah, so that's what this thing is doing. First thing is, but that's important. The first thing, the incoming power is a multispectral optical power, which we then first have to convert with a lot of effort in very smart solar cells, also being done by a sister institute, ESA, converted into electricity. Yeah? Do you know what is the efficiency of the conversion process of a present solar cell, just as a number?
Around 25%.
That's already quite at the optimum, but very good, yeah. So, and there's some learning here. Just it's incoming energy, but we are throwing away 3/4 of the power. We're throwing away 3/4 of the power. There's physics behind it, so I'm not arrogant saying that, but it's just a fact. Yeah? So that means it took us quite some effort to get that electrical energy. Yeah? And there's something which I really would like to think about. There are different forms of energy, and electrical power is one of the most valuable forms of energy. So once we do that, then we should not waste it. Yeah? So once we have made electrical power, it's not available in abundance. We have to make sure this conversion is efficient. Does somebody know the typical efficiency of such a system today? So what are these things doing? Roughly when they're electrical to electrical, what are the efficiencies there? Is it more like 25% or is it higher? What is the feeling in this room?
I would say it may be higher, like 80, 90 or even higher.
Very good. So, for example, there's even laws for that, for these converters, which are the same. So these ones or in these ones, they have to be better. So, for example, for computer, where we make a similar form of conversion, there's, for example, you can only buy such a converter if it has 95% of efficiency. Yeah? The question is now, why are we interested in this form of power electronics? And there's a very fundamental idea. That is that you can take it from the solar energy, for example. Today the sun is coming in, so it's a variable input. Yeah? And this is a mild form of control, so we are not getting the power we want, but maybe I take it from another point. When you think turn the power on, do you really want to turn the power on? Or when you're turning the power on, what are you also controlling very deliberately or very finely? And we can switch on the light. Maybe we take the easiest example. If I turn this on here, the display, have you ever used your screen at maximum intensity? Typically, you go to some middle value. This is a very simple form of power control. What I'm trying to say is, for example, if you now have e-mobility, how often do you go at the max power of the e-car? And the answer is, if you make statistically, probably less than 1% of the time. Yeah? And this is the same problem for the solar converters. We need to learn to control power also efficiently when we are only using a fraction. And for example, you could say, now, what is he talking about? This is not interesting. Yeah, but think about it. You're sitting with your car, maybe let's assume you're coming by car, and you're sitting next to a boardwalk. Yeah? And then you're running up this car, you're standing, and then you press the accelerator a bit, but you don't want to move fast because otherwise you're jumping into the wall. And you just press it, and then but the engine has to lift up this whole car, which is more than a ton, just for a slight little moment, 10 centimeters. So you're moving a ton of mass for 10 centimeters, and you hope that the engine is able to do that. But the microsecond later, you want to turn it down again. Because you're not, if you took the same force once the car is lifted, you would bump into the wall. And that gives you a feeling, wow, so I'm using a lot of power, and then a microsecond later, nearly nothing. And still, any energy which you have put into this process should be converted efficiently. Yeah? And what I'm trying to tell you is, you can start from the solar converter. Will the solar converter also be efficient if it has very little power? And the answer generally is no. You have to do a lot to make sure that even on a day like that, we have a high efficiency in the power conversion. Yeah? So a system which is very efficient at full sun is not efficient automatically when you have very little sun incoming. And to do that, it's circuit design. You need a lot of special circuits, and it's especially a lot of programming that you're not bumping into the wall with the car. So that's a very important factor. And for example, here you can see that when you have this solar energy, there's a lot of electronics needed to get the power into the grid. And that's the first learning why we need that is, for example, when you're thinking of the network, what are we at the moment, or sometimes people say we are worried about that. What is network stability for you when you think about electronics? If you had to describe with your words now, what is network stability for you? So for example, apparently we are here, I can put my wall plug, I can put it to the wall. How do I make sure the network is really stable? What are you doing when you're just using, for example, this? How do you contribute to network stability? Do you contribute at all? And the answer is you do, very strongly. So half of this thing is filters. And why? There's this very simple idea. We can try that. You have all your laptops in the net now, and we all have 30 people in this room, all remove the plug from the network. Click. And the power is still there. But what did we just do? We just did something very stupid to the network. if there was no filters. There are filters in, so this is why we can do that. If we did it without filters, we would have killed the network by now. Why? What is this network? And that's maybe gives you a good feeling. What is this network? This is essentially a sine wave. Sine wave at 50 hertz. Yeah? If we all remove our power from the network, so that we take power from the network, we will critically influence the shape of this sine wave. And if everybody does that, for example, let's take the famous examples where there's on networks there's high load. Everybody in the break of a big sports event goes to the fridge and opens it. All the fridges are turning on. It's a nightmare for power supply. Yeah? And the only reason why the network stays stable is that we filter away the things we put on the network. So that is a very important message. You're not only drawing power from the network, you're also attributing something from the power. You're doing something to the network by using it. You have never thought about it because some people told you you have to use this device and then it will work. And this is also something which from the energy point of view is now important. The problem we have with solar power is that we are losing quite some power in the solar converter because the power we put to the network has to be at very high quality. That's very important. We waste a lot of energy to make sure the power we're putting on the network is clean. Because if we didn't, the network would be uncontrolled. This is not speaking against solar power. It's just to tell you, if you want to organize a network like that, you have to make sure what you're putting on the solar network or the electrical grid is good. If you don't, the network will collapse. And there is some learning for sustainability here. There's a lot of energy we waste or we invest to make, for example, the network available. We could have a much more efficient network, for example, which would have much more power, but it would not be that stable. Yeah? And maybe I ask you this question. Did anybody of you in this room have a power failure in the last 4 weeks? Okay, last 6 months? Last year? Okay, somebody says yes. You want to mention where it was? Yeah. Oh, okay, yeah.
Like it's
Yeah?
yeah, I had them, but it was I don't know, it was in the whole area.
Yeah, you're right. There was one, yeah, you're right. There was one 3 weeks ago or so, yeah. Correct, yeah.
In the beginning of December, I think, last year.
Yeah. And I just want to give you some courage because people are talking critically about when they speak negatively about renewables, people are often speaking about Tag-Nacht-Flaute or things like that. I don't know what the proper English word for that is. These famous things. What they forget is that the availability of power in Germany is extremely high. So on the average, we have minutes of power failures per year, minutes, and it hasn't changed over the last 10 years. So there's no impact on the renewables on the availability of power. There is a bit of course, a lot of changes on the network recently because we went out of atomic power, but also there, just because there was this discussion on the weekend, 2 numbers. Maximum power consumption on the remaining atomic plants is 3 gigawatts. Typical amount of power produced by renewables is an order of magnitude higher. And people are worried about atomic plants. That's ridiculous. I don't want to speak about atomic plants, but just numbers. Yeah? So most of the power comes from something else by now. And it's not only coal. Yeah? Just to be very reasonable. And what is important is you can check, there's a homepage when you go to the Fraunhofer ISA homepage, not my institute, the other one. You go there, you can get these numbers on a minute stays, and it's important that you understand these things. Yeah. Power circuits. And for example, this is a very simple, and here this is something you can actually understand. We have very simple control circuits. For example, this is a circuit which runs a voltage into a voltage. And why would you ever do that? Yeah, it's very simple, because exactly as I said, you're not going to use the maximum power of this display. I mean, nobody uses it as max power. Everybody goes here, and that means that on this line, you would be typically operating the power circuit somewhere here or here in this range. Yeah? So you need a linear dependence of some characteristics which you change in order to get the right intensity. Yeah? So that's what we do with this. And maybe some ideas which are also important for the network idea. Safety. Yeah, so, for example, obviously this thing is built that I can do this, and I'm not very worried that I would get a stroke. And the same thing is done. And if I got a stroke, electric stroke, there are some principles. For example, in the case of your power failure, what typically happens is that one side of the transformer melts. Yeah, so you have a transformer, so that an output voltage, if there's a problem, melts. And if this, let's assume this part of the circuit has molten completely, there's an inductive coupling in between. Yeah? So that means that if one side of the system is completely burned out, the rest of the system is working. And this is a requirement. So you cannot, if you have certain power levels, it's not allowed to have any direct contact between the systems. Yeah? And you can say now, why is this important? Because the obvious solution for the same problem of control in this circuit, obviously, if this half of the circuit melts, is still connected. And you can say now, why is this important? Yeah, it is because when, for example, our institute, when your power failure happened, was not affected. So this part of Freiburg dies and comes back, but the rest of the system remains. That's good, because it would be bad if we had a total power failure for the rest of the city, which is not what we want. Yeah? Again, this idea that the type of circuit decides on what you get from the network. And this is now the smart grid, and the reason why we talk about all this is that by now we are changing the topology of the energy system we are in. So one thing which is clearly needed is that we have a lot of factors which we talked already about. It's the power quality and the efficiency. But for example, in case you have a power failure, you want to have this network essentially coming back relatively fast. And why do you need to know about that? Because we are still changing critically the types of energy generation we have. Energiewende means we are changing our primary sources, and we are changing them in a way that the consumers don't really realize. Yeah, but that's the best thing. The only thing which they get is no carbon dioxide, and the price should be okay. Yeah, but that means that you have to know about the construction of such networks, and networks are essentially circuits which are stacked. So that's one way of how you get from a circuit to a subsystem to a system. And I hope that there's many things that we have to learn about. Let's skip that. And maybe just to come to something which is, I wanted to check, I wanted to show you this. From the types of circuits, there's in the power domain especially, there's many. And then there's another thing which is related to communication. This is, for example, one way. This is something, for example, which could be in here. And what can you learn from that? The type of systems we are doing there are quite okay. That's not so different from what we do otherwise. However, there's a lot of learnings which you can do in the sense of why do we do things the way we do. For example, when I ask you a simple question, for example, in terms of sustainability, would you prefer a microwave link to your home or would you prefer a fiber? Not in terms of speed, in terms of sustainability. What would you like to have? So if you had the choice, you are sitting at home and you want some kind of digital connection. Would you choose fiber or would you choose something like that? And what would be the criteria for you? If you had a free choice, I mean, if you're in a Studentenwohnheim, I hope you have some fiber there, which is of course very good. But if you have to make a decision, what is the decisive argument for communication? Any ideas? Does anybody come from a remote village where there is no direct connection? Or something who's not connected yet? How do we make that decision? So for example, what is more efficient in per bit? So is the optical fiber better if you think in terms of how much energy we have to invest to transport a bit, or is a microwave link better? Does anybody know? You can guess, what is the backbone of the internet, how it's done there?
Fiber, because it's way more efficient than
Yeah, so that's very important. Everybody get that. Fiber is very efficient when you have it. And why is that? Because you can put so much fibers, so much over the fiber. So that the fiber gives you a lot more bandwidth. Yeah? So you're faster typically. But what do you have to do to use a fiber?
you have to build it, you have to put a cable down to village, and it can be very expensive for smaller towns, and therefore maybe in some places you don't do.
That's the money aspect. And what if you think in terms of sustainability, what do you have to do there? You have to dig. You have to put cretin. And that's very interesting because depending on the situation, the fiber is very good, but you are digging. You're changing the infrastructure. And then the question is, how much cretin, how much carbon dioxide do you put into the ground by doing so? So there's apparently a ratio between what you get as we say, OPEX or expenditure when you operate it, versus what you have to invest in the fundamentals to do it. And for example, a microwave link sometimes is easy. You just connect two devices. You don't have to do any digging. You just put them on the roof. And so in this term, this is relatively efficient, but it's not so powerful in terms of giving you bits per something. At the same time, a fiber is much better, but you have to do a strong infrastructure investment. And so in efficiency, you would directly go, everybody gets a fiber. But then we would start, apart from all the clearances we would need and all the Genehmigung or whatever, we would have to build a lot, and that's another story. So you have to think systems from this perspective. So for example, it's clear if you connect to universities, you will use a fiber because there's so much demand from smart people like you connecting, want to get connected to the KIT or to some other university, that's clear. There you will use a fiber. And hopefully if it's done in a nice way, you can reduce the amount of carbon dioxide put to the ground and materials and so on. While if you're, for example, in a remote village, you can get up some capacity. You will pay maybe with the efficiency, so you will have to spend more on the operation, but you don't have to dig. You just set it up. And it's not an easy task to design that. So there you see some complexity. And depending on that, that's also something we will learn. Some processes in this are extremely inefficient. So, for example, you know that, I think, from your knowledge. How do you save power in this? You essentially switch off Bluetooth, WLAN, and the microwave link, and then this thing will already stay on for much longer. So the microwave generation typically is very inefficient. So that's one thing. So when we be at this level, that's where you spend most of your energy. And a last statement, that's why I also like talking about the cell phone. It's like a little world in the sense we only have so and so much energy available in the battery or on our planet. So we have to always think how we spend that. And it's true for many systems. It's true for cars, it's true for airplanes, because what you learn from this, that your amount of energy is always limited. And that's a smart thing. So you can learn a lot from that, from the system idea that you simply have to do with limited resources. And for example, that's why I want to motivate you to think about systems, because on the IT sector, we are completely crazy. We say demand or data rate or use is growing exponentially. So think about that. You're having a thing which grows exponentially in its consumption. You are clicking, and we are using all this data. But at the same time, you learn energies and resources are limited. So this is, although it's a crazy system, but it's also a very intelligent system, because the battery can only supply so and so much power. By the way, that's what I wanted to ask you. Battery progress. How much, if I buy a good battery today, what is the typical increase in capacity per volume next year, maybe, a year from now? What can we expect there? How much change do we have on that? Does somebody know that? So I'm comparing what I have to do as a good battery today, comparing to what I had last year or 5 years ago, or maybe next year. How much change is there related to the volume? Any thoughts on that? So is there a big change? Is it doubling, or is it just a few percent?
I think there's not so much change. They are very stable in the capacity last year.
Yeah. And it's simple physics, so it's not easy to build something which is much better than it was last year. And that is good, because if we're speaking about sustainability, it's these principles. You only have so and so much, and maybe you can expect a little bit more next year, but not 20%, not 50%. It's in the percent range. And at the same time, and this is actually one of the nightmares of this for people like me, we have a given capacity, and the data consumption is increasing exponentially. Which means that everything we do have to put down the amount of energy consumed for every bit we do with essentially a log function in order to make it a stable system. And why is that? And with that, I want to leave you. The reason is your behaviors. You are tired after 90 minutes of me speaking, or your cell phone is tired after a day of operation. And these times are given. You cannot sell a cell phone which needs to be recharged 10 times a day. Maybe we could agree that if we had a smart point here and enough supplies once a day, and if it was fastly charged, we could agree, but not 10 times a day. You would say this is nonsense. Okay. So I hope you can convince you this is not just a little bit of electronics we are learning here. We are learning principles. We are learning how to do things, and things which are getting useful. And you understand a lot, because some of you are going to get sustainable systems engineers. So we have to learn how to build sustainable systems. And that has to do a lot of technical things, and I hope it will be interesting. Questions? Okay, I talked too much. See you next week. Looking forward to that, and I hope you have some motivation. Thank you very much.